So a while back I saw this Govee Aura smart lamp pop up on Amazon. I thought it looked really cool and it got a lot of great reviews. I watched some videos and everyone seemed to think it was pretty amazing. It wasn't too expensive, and I know Govee's been around for a while, so they're a pretty reputable brand. I pulled the trigger a couple weeks ago and I've had some time to play around with it and I absolutely love it. Curiosity got the best of me and I wondered how hard would it be to make something like this on my own. So in this video I will be walking you through step by step how I made my version of the Govee Aura. The first thing I had to figure out how to do was to cut some circles out of wood. Now there's quite a few attachments that you can buy on Amazon for your router that's going to help cut a circle, but they're all about $40-50 on the low end, and I wanted to see if I can make pretty much something that did the same thing a little bit cheaper. So all I'm doing right now is removing that bottom face plate off of the router, just using a screwdriver, taking those 4 screws out, and that's going to remove that black part from the base of my router. I ordered a 12-inch square sheet of acrylic off Amazon, and this is what I'm going to be attaching to my router to help me cut the circles. Now I'm taking that base plate that came off my router and I'm putting it right in the middle of the acrylic, and I'm using those screw holes as a template for where I'm going to be drilling into the acrylic. Depending on your screw size for the router, find a drill bit that is about the exact same size as the small part of the screw, because we're going to drill this through the acrylic, but we don't want the screw to go all the way through. I'm just checking right now to make sure that the small part of the screw fits through the hole that I just drilled. Now that all 4 holes are made, we need to figure out how to sink these screw heads into the acrylic so that everything is flush. I'm just going to be using a drill bit that's a little bit bigger than the head of the screw. If you had a countersink bit, this would be the perfect time to use that. Now you don't want to go too deep with this because you want the screw to still have something to grip onto when you put it back on the router. You want to take off just enough so that the screw fits below the surface. Here you can see that the screw is still above the surface of the acrylic, so I need to use the drill bit and go a little bit deeper. I'm going to be using a 2-inch hole saw to make the cutout so that the drill bits on my router have a place to go through. These are handy to use when you don't need to make something that is super accurate or precise. All that's left is now attaching the acrylic onto the router, and you don't need to put the black piece back on that you took off earlier because this is taking the place of that. I would recommend maybe using a Phillips hand screwdriver instead of a drill. I did strip one of these pretty bad to the point where I couldn't even use it, and that's why you'll notice in the video down the road I only have 3 of the 4 in here. The cylinder that I'm using to house the diffusing material for the lamp is about 4 inches in diameter, so I'm drilling a hole in this acrylic that's about 2 inches away from the drill bit. This is going to create a stationary pivot point for the router to go around, which will hopefully create a perfect 4-inch circle. The hole I just made, I used a 7/32 of an inch drill bit, and I'm taking that same drill bit out, flipping it around, and that should fit perfectly into that hole. After a lot of trial and error and drilling a lot of holes in the acrylic, I finally got the cuts perfect. This is the unfinished prototype that I made that should give you a good idea for what I was going for. I wanted to create a small channel or groove for the cylinder to sit on so that it wouldn't move around, and then the outer cut I wanted to make flush with the outside of the glass. So when I said I made a lot of holes in the acrylic, this is what I meant. And what I did is after each time I drilled in, I would test it out on the wood, make the cut, and if it was too big, I would have to then make another hole in the acrylic that was a little bit closer to the center and then redo it. And I think it took me about 10 times to find the 2 perfect distances to make the cuts that you see here. Now that I'm done with the template, I can now actually cut out the final pieces I will be using in the end product. The board I'm using is select pine that's 1 inch thick by 5 inches wide. Now, just like most of my videos, someone who has any sort of woodworking experience will probably be wondering, what on earth am I doing? And for the most part, I really have no clue what I'm doing. And at the end, I'm always thinking there had to have been a better way to do what I just did. And one thing I like about making these videos is there are a lot of people in the comments who know what they're doing and make great suggestions and ideas on how I could have improved different steps throughout the process. So I really appreciate those comments and keep them coming. I built a platform to lay the wood I'll be cutting so that it's not sitting on the table. I use clamps on either side to secure it, and I'll be drilling a hole in the center of the wood and then taking that drill bit out and putting it in the same hole I just cut so that only about 1/4 of an inch of it's above the wood. Now make sure you're using the same size drill bit that you use to put the holes in the acrylic, since this is what we're going to be using as the pivot points. So from the template I made before, I already know the 2 holes that I'm going to be using to make the circles, and I marked those with permanent marker. So all I need to do now is line up the drill bit with the first hole and make the cut. And I have what's called a plunge router, which means I can push down to set the depth of the cut that I want to make. And on this first one, I'm going to be cutting that little lip that the glass cylinder is going to be sitting on. So you don't want to go down very far at all. I would say maybe 1/8 of an inch would be fine, and maybe even a little bit less than that. During this project, I quickly realized that router bits come in many different shapes and sizes and have different purposes. I ended up buying a 1/4 inch spiral bit, which allows me to cut down and side to side, which I needed for this. Now that the shallow cut's been made, I just need to find the second hole that I marked on the acrylic that's a little bit further out, put that in the drill bit, and then this is the cut that's going to go through the entire wood. Even though it's going to be going through the entire 1 inch eventually, this first pass I'm only going to take about 1/2 inch off. After the first pass, taking about 1/2 inch off, I'm just going to clean things up, vacuum out all the shavings, and I'm just going to put the cylinder on it just to make sure that we're still in good shape. Everything's looking great so far, so I'm putting the router back in the same hole that it was just at. And on this pass, I'm going to go all the way through the wood, but I'm not going to go all the way around the circle. I want to leave about 1 inch of wood still there because that's going to hold this circle up. If I did go all the way around, that circle would lean towards one side, and my guess is the router bit would take a big chunk out of it. Here you'll be able to see the piece of wood that's still left over, and I believe I had to go over this little piece a couple more times to get it to the point where I can just easily snap it off. Now I'm just sanding down those edges so I have a nice smooth surface. Now that we have the bottom piece done, we just have to do the exact same thing for the top.
Don't play with my heart, baby. I should have known from the start, darling.
Since the top and bottom of the Govee Aura has smooth rounded edges, I figured I need to do the same. Next, I'm securing a scrap piece of wood, and this doesn't have to be a circle shape, but it has to be smaller in diameter than the piece of wood that we just cut out. And I'm going to secure that to the top of this, and I'm going to be using a round over bit to create that smooth edge that the Govee Aura has. Here you'll be able to see the round over bit that I'm using. It's a 1.5 inch diameter, and this creates a 1/2 inch round over. And I apologize for the angle coming up here, you really can't see much, but this router bit is really easy to use. You just press that metal bearing up against the wood and just go around in the circle, and you're going to have a smooth finish on top when it's done. I've now mounted what's going to be the top piece of the lamp onto the wood in the back, and I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch dado bit. And since the top piece of the Govee Aura is definitely a lot thinner than the bottom piece, I'm going to be taking off a little over half the wood. So right now I'm just making a couple quick passes through the middle or near the middle to make sure that I sunk that screw far enough down where the router bit's not going to be hitting it. So I would say about once a day I do something that makes me wonder how I've managed to stay alive for 35 years. And this is definitely one of those times. And right about now I'm starting to notice a little bit of wobble in the router, and things just aren't feeling as sturdy as they were in the beginning. And right about now it dawns on me that I'm literally cutting the wood that my acrylic is resting on for support. Yep, I'm pretty smart. Fortunately, it was a pretty easy fix. I screwed in a couple pieces of wood on either side of the circle, and I'll be able to rest the acrylic on these pieces rather than resting it on the wood that I'm cutting into. On your right of the circle, you can see where I took a little bit of a deeper cut than I wanted to during this mistake. So I'm using the drill and sinking that screw a little bit deeper so that when I run the router over everything again, I'm going to go a little bit further down to get rid of that. going to sand the top here just a little bit to make it nice and smooth. And just like I did on the base piece, I'm going to be using a bit that's going to create a 1/4 inch round over on this top piece. In this step, I'm clamping down the base piece, and I'm going to be using a Forstner bit that is 3/4 inch. And the idea here is I'm going to be creating a circle in the base unit that's going to fit the 3/4 inch dowel that I'm using, which I'm going to wrap the lights around. I'm not going all the way through the wood, just about a 1/2 inch, which is going to be enough to fit the dowel in there, so it's not going to wiggle around too much. And if you don't have a Forstner bit, just use wood glue. That would work perfectly fine. I'm going to be doing the same thing with the top piece, and since this one's a lot skinnier, just make sure you don't go down too far because we definitely don't want to go through the entire wood. I'm going to be clamping the base unit back down, and I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch drill bit to make a hole pretty close to the one that's already in the center there, and this is where I'm going to be feeding the wires through. Right here, I just flipped that base piece over and screwed it down, and I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch drill bit to make a small little channel, and this is so that when I run the wires through that hole that I just drilled, and they come out the bottom side, they're going to be able to fit in this channel so that the bottom piece can lay flat on whatever surface I have it on. This is the first time that we can start to see this thing come together, and what I need to do now is figure out how much I need to cut the 3/4 inch dowel to make sure that it fits in the channel and that I can fit the top lid on and close it securely. When you cut the circle rod, if anything, make sure you cut it a little bit too big. You can always go back and make smaller cuts, ensuring that it fits perfectly. You can see that I didn't cut enough of the rod and that the lid won't fit. So I'll have to go back and take a little bit more off. Alright, so this time the lid fits on perfectly, the rod is in there securely, and we can move on to the next steps. I'm not so concerned about any holes that you can see on the bottom of the base unit, but the top one, I want to definitely cover that up. So I'm using some wood filler. It goes on pink and dries the color of the wood, and then you can go back and sand that down so you have a nice smooth surface that does not look like there was ever any holes. I'm going to be painting the top and bottom outside pieces a gray color to match the same color that the Govee Aura has. And I didn't do it right in this video, but that little groove that the glass sits on, you're going to want to paint that gray as well. Now for the inside of the top and bottom pieces, I'm going to be painting it white, and this is where I made the mistake. I painted that groove where the glass sits on white in the video, but I later went back and painted it gray since it looks better. Now, I don't know why I didn't do this before I started painting, but I noticed there was some frayed edges around the circle, and it started to bother me, so I just took some sandpaper and got those little pieces that were sticking out removed, and then I touched everything up again with some paint. Now that the wood filler has dried, I can just sand off the top here quickly, and then I can go back and paint this gray. It's not perfect, and if I wanted to be a little bit more picky, I could use some more wood filler and let it dry and sand it again, and it would be a little bit more smooth. But after a couple coats of paint, you're never going to be able to notice it that much anyways. I'm going to be soldering some extension wire to the LED lights, and depending on where your plug-in is going to be, this will determine how much of this extension wire you're going to need, because at the end of this, that's where we're going to attach the controller and then the power source to plug into the wall. Doing it this way is going to prevent us from having to put the actual controller inside the lamp. Right now I'm just stripping back a little bit of the wire so we can get these tips soldered and prepared to put on the LED strips. Make sure you give the wires a good twist before you begin to solder. What What I'm doing right now is just putting a little bit of solder on the tip of the iron. This is going to help me heat up the wire from below, and then on top, when you put the solder over the wire, it just kind of sucks it in. Since you don't need much exposed wire to attach these to the LEDs, I'm just trimming off the ends. Now we're just applying a little bit of solder to the pads. Just like in my last project, I'm going to be using some WS2812B individual addressable LED lights, and I'm going to control it using an ESP8266 development board. I'll also leave a link in the description to some videos you can watch that easily walk you through how to flash the WLED software to the development board. I'm still not very good at soldering, and I'll leave some links to videos in the description that do a much better job of explaining this process, but I'm just trying to melt the solder that's on the pad enough so I can slide the tip of the wire into that solder, and then once I remove the heat, everything hardens up and you should have a good connection. Once the extension wire is soldered to the LED lights, I'm just going to estimate how much of this wire I'm going to need, and this is based on where I plan on putting the light, and then make the cut. I'm going to take some jumper wires, and since I'm going to be using the female end of these, I need to cut off the other end to get to the exposed wire. Use your wire strippers and peel back enough so about a little less than ½ an inch of the wire is showing. And this is eventually what we're going to be attaching to the extension wire that we just wired up to the LED strip. Here I'm going to be inserting the post into the hole and then marking where I can start wrapping the LED strips around it. Once you're close to the top, just cut off the remaining LED strips that you don't need, and make sure you leave a little bit of wood exposed because that top part still has to fit in the hole that we cut on the top piece. I'd probably recommend using some hot glue at the beginning and end of the LED strip just to make sure things don't unravel. We can begin to feed the extension wire through the hole in the base that we cut out, and then once we've done that, we should then be able to slide the dowel into the circle cutout. Once everything's put together, you can flip the base unit over, and here you can see where that channel we cut out on the bottom is just wide enough to fit the wires so that this will sit flat on whatever surface you have it on. Before we get into how we're going to diffuse the LEDs, I'm going to quick wire this thing up to make sure the lights actually work. Take the end of the extension wires that are attached to the LEDs, and we're going to be stripping back about a little less than ½ an inch so we can get to the bare wire. Now we're going to be attaching our jumper wire to these extension wires, and you just take one jumper wire and put it up right next to the extension wire and then just twist them together like this. Now that we have all 3 jumper wires connected to all 3 of the extension cord wires, we can begin to plug things into our controller. Now at this point, the controller already does have the WLED software flashed on it, and again, I'll have a link in the description to a video that you can watch that'll easily walk you through how to do this. Now the power wire, I'm just plugging into the VIN port on the controller. The data wire, I'm plugging into the D4 port on the controller. And the ground wire, I'm plugging into the GND port on the controller. I'm going to be using an old micro USB phone charger to power this. And if you choose to go this route, you definitely don't want those exposed wires touching each other. So make sure you wrap those individually with some electrical tape. If you wanted a little bit more juice and wanted the lights to get just a little bit brighter, I would recommend getting a 10 amp 5 volt power supply adapter like this one. And if you go this route, you would not need the micro USB charger, but make sure you get an adapter that has a plug attachment at the end where you can feed the exposed wires into. And all you have to do to hook this up now is take the power exposed wires that are twisted together, and we're going to feed that into the positive section of that adapter, and then the ground exposed wires, we're going to feed that into the negative one, and then you should just be able to screw it down tightly. The exposed data wires don't need to be plugged in anywhere, so make sure you cover that up with some electrical tape. And one other quick tip, when you're putting the power and the ground wires into this adapter, make sure you're shoving them in far enough where there's no wires that are exposed coming out, because you do not want those to cross.
With my heart, baby, I should have known.
For the diffuser, I ended up finding some blank stencil paper from Hobby Lobby that was kind of a milky white color, and these ended up working perfect. And to provide enough diffusion so that I can't see any of the individual LED lights and that it's just one even glow, I did need to double up on these. And if you don't have a Hobby Lobby nearby, I did find some stencils on Amazon that worked great too. I believe it was a pack of 12, but on those I did need to use about 5 layers to create enough diffusion. Now, for a little background on this project, I never thought I would end up using glass for this. I initially thought I would just find some sort of milky white plastic cylinder that I could use that would work perfect, but I searched on Amazon high and low, I looked on other websites, and I just could not find anything that was a cylinder that was about 4 inches wide that looked like it would work. So I ended up using glass, and in the end I'm actually really happy that I went with this, because it allowed me to do some kind of cool customization that you'll see later on in the video here. Another thing I went back and forth with on this project was whether I should put the white plastic on the inside of the tube or the outside. I ended up doing the inside simply because it was easier and it did look a little bit cleaner in the end. Right now I'm just getting that first stencil cut down to size so it's going to fit perfectly within the tube, and then once I do that I will use that to trace out and cut out the second stencil that I need. Before we get into the final pictures and videos, I wanted to show you the idea I had to completely and easily customize the look and feel of this lamp. When I was in Hobby Lobby, I noticed there were a lot of different styles of paper and other materials that had some cool designs on it. I bought them thinking I could maybe incorporate them somehow into this project. One of the designs I found was this rose pattern, and I believe they actually call it vellum paper that it's on. And since this paper already has some diffusion type qualities, I only needed to put one of the white stencils behind it to block out the perfect amount of light. I'll quick put the top on so you can see what this design would look like during the day if I didn't have any of the LED lights on. Another design I found on vellum paper was these small hearts, and you can kind of see here that it does block out some of the light, so that's why you only need one of those sheets behind it to make it look perfect. The last thing that caught my eye was this black mesh plastic canvas. And after cutting it down to size, you can of course play around with how you think it looks best, but I personally think sandwiching this between 2 of the white stencil sheets of paper and then putting that in the cylinder gives it the best look. In the video here, I believe I put the 2 white stencil papers in the cylinder first, followed by this black mesh, but later on I changed it up. Part of what made this project so fun for me was just seeing how closely I could get it to look like the Govee Aura, but I will be the first to admit that there was a lot of steps and the average person might not have the time or desire to do all this. So the benefit of using this 4-inch diameter cylinder is that it's roughly the same size as most candles are. And you could simply take off the tops and then move it over to the glass cylinder. And I'd probably still recommend using a wooden one on the bottom so that you could still have the option to drill the holes to run the cords through. Now, it may not be as perfect of a fit as doing it custom, but it's definitely going to save you a lot of time. Now, I know this video focused exclusively on making the lamp, so I will leave my thoughts and impressions of the Govee Aura in the description if you're interested. And if you're still here, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the final pictures and videos right after this.